The boat was in flames when I found it, his body bleeding on the deck, eyes half open searching for air, for help, for anything to keep him alive. And that moment, with the smell of burnt fuel mixed with sea salt and the iron scent of blood, I knew the past had come back to destroy me for good. But this time, I wasn't gonna let anyone die. Not again. My name is Logan Vance. I'm 42 years old, and for nearly 2 decades, I've lived like a ghost. Not the kind of ghost that haunts old houses, but the kind that walks the streets of a small town, being invisible to everyone, except when they want to judge you. Silverwood, North Carolina, is the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where families have roots that go back 3 generations of fishermen, and where men like me aren't exactly welcome. Not when you're the single guy raising a son alone. Not when the whispers in the grocery store aisles include words like weird, different, and the one they never say to your face but you feel hanging in the air like sea mist, faggot. I repair boats, cracked hulls, stalled engines, rusted propellers, anything that floats and needs fixing. I work alone in a small shop next to the old harbor, where the smell of naval paint and diesel oil mixes with the constant sound of waves hitting the rotting wooden docks. It's honest work, but lonely, and that's exactly how I planned it. After Ethan died, I promised myself I would never get involved with anyone again, never let anyone get close enough to destroy me when they left. And it worked. For 8 years, it worked perfectly. Until that stormy night. It was almost midnight when I heard the explosion. I was locked in the shop, finishing repairs on Sam Miller's fishing boat, the Coast Guard veteran neighbor who always looked at me with that quiet disdain, as if I were a stain on the town's reputation. The sound was deafening, like thunder born underwater bursting at the surface. I felt the vibration in the floor, in the tools hanging on the wall, in my bones. I dropped the sander and ran outside. The sky was black, covered by heavy clouds threatening to open up at any moment. But it wasn't the storm that caught my attention. It was the orange glow at the harbor, about 300 yards away, reflecting on the dark waters like liquid hell. A boat was on fire. Not just any boat, a police patrol boat. And there was someone inside. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. My body moved on its own. Triggered by years of military training I tried to bury along with my past. I reached the dock in less than 2 minutes, heart pounding in my chest, lungs burning from the run. The boat was listing, sinking slowly by the stern, flames consuming the control panel and spreading rapidly across the fiberglass deck. And there, slumped next to the helm, was him. Jake Hollis. I knew who he was. Everyone in Silverwood knew Deputy Hollis. Tall, broad shoulders, dark hair cut close, the kind of guy who looks like he was born wearing a badge. He was face down, his uniform soaked in blood, metal shrapnel embedded in his back and the side of his abdomen. He was breathing with difficulty, gasping, the kind of breathing that says lungs are filling with something that shouldn't be there. I jumped into the water without thinking. The freezing temperature hit me like a punch, but I was already swimming, already moving toward the boat. I reached the side of the hull, pulled my body up using arm strength, and dragged myself onto the burning deck. The heat was intense, suffocating. My hands found his pulse, weak but present. There was still time. I turned Jake onto his back carefully, assessing the injuries. 3 large shrapnel wounds, active bleeding on the left side of the abdomen, possible organ perforation. Shallow breathing, crackling in the chest, probable pneumothorax. Shit. I needed to stop the bleeding and stabilize the airway before he drowned in his own blood. My fingers moved automatically, as if the last 8 years of silence had never existed. I tore his shirt, exposed the wound, pressed hard using my own t-shirt as a makeshift compress. Warm blood flowed between my fingers, but the pressure started to slow the flow. Jake groaned, eyes opening slowly. He looked at me, confused, scared, pain stamped on every line of his face. He tried to speak, but only managed to cough, blood escaping his lips. "Don't try to talk," I said. my voice coming out steadier than I expected. "Breathe slowly. I'm going to get you out of here." But the boat was sinking fast, and the flames were spreading. I had 30 seconds more, tops. I picked Jake up in my arms. He was heavy, over 200 pounds of muscle and gear. Carried him to the edge of the boat and jumped with him into the water. The shock of the cold was brutal, but I held tight, keeping his head above the surface while swimming on my back toward the dock. Every stroke was a fight against the weight, against the current, against the fatigue starting to corrode my muscles. But I couldn't stop. Not again. Not after Ethan. I reached the dock, pulled Jake up, and laid him on his side, keeping his airway open. Sirens were already wailing in the distance. Someone had called emergency services. I just needed to keep him alive until the ambulance arrived. I applied pressure to the wound again, counted his breaths, monitored his pulse. 1 minute, 2, 3, and finally, red and blue lights flooded the harbor, and paramedics ran toward us. "What happened?" one of them shouted, kneeling beside me. "Boat explosion, shrapnel wounds, active abdominal bleeding, possible pneumothorax. Applied direct pressure, stabilized airway." I replied automatically, using medical jargon I hadn't spoken in years. The paramedic looked at me in surprise, but didn't question. They took control, put Jake on a stretcher, and took him away. I stayed there, kneeling on the wet dock, covered in blood and soot, shaking from cold and adrenaline. Around me, a small crowd had formed. Curious locals, police officers, Sam Miller with his arms crossed, staring at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. "You saved him," someone murmured. I didn't answer. I just stood up, turned my back, and walked back to the shop. But I knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. 2 days later, they came to me. Sheriff Owen Tate, a man in his 50s, gray hair, unmistakable military posture, and federal agent Sophia Cruz, a woman with a sharp gaze and direct voice who didn't waste words. They appeared at the shop door while I was welding a hull and waited in silence until I turned off the torch. "Logan Vance?" the sheriff asked, though he knew very well who I was. "That's me. We need to talk about what happened the other night." I put the torch aside, took off my gloves, and crossed my arms. "I already told the paramedics everything. There's nothing else to say." "Yes, there is," Sophia Cruz intervened, stepping forward. "You saved Deputy Hollis's life using combat rescue techniques not taught in standard first aid courses. We did a quick background check on you. Logan Vance, former Navy SAR rescue swimmer, decorated 3 times for rescue actions in combat zones. You're not just a boat repairman, are you?" I felt my stomach tighten. I had buried that part of my life. Buried it along with Ethan, along with the memories of icy waters, impossible rescues, and the weight of carrying bodies, living and dead, back to the surface. "That was a long time ago," I said, my voice coming out harder than intended. "I don't do that work anymore." "We're not here to recruit you," the sheriff said, his voice calm but firm. "We're here because we need your help. The explosion on Jake's boat wasn't an accident. It was a planned attack. There's a smuggling ring operating in Silverwood waters. They use the coves and drainage canals to transport drugs and weapons. They call themselves the Trident." The name hit me like a shot. The Trident. The same group that had killed Ethan 8 years ago. The same group that was never caught, never held accountable, that continued operating with impunity while I buried the man I loved and pretended my life hadn't ended along with him. "No," I said, turning my back on them. "I'm not getting involved in this." "Ethan Shaw was your partner in the Navy, wasn't he?" Sophia Cruz said, and every word was a blade. "Died in an ambush in Silverwood waters while investigating suspicious smuggling activities. The case was never solved. But now we have a chance to catch those responsible, and you can help." I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, tried to contain the fury rising in my chest. Ethan, who laughed when I got nervous before a dive. Ethan, who wrote letters to me hidden in the base quarters because military policy forbade our relationship. Ethan, who made me promise that if anything happened to him, I would take care of Leo, his son. Ethan, who died alone, drowned, shot, while I was miles away, unable to do anything. I have a son to take care of, I said, voice trembling. I can't risk it. We're not asking you to go into the field, the sheriff said. We just want you to train our officers. Water rescue techniques, vessel boarding, combat first aid. Things you know better than anyone here. You can do this without exposing yourself. I turned to face them. Sophia Cruz looked at me with that relentless intensity, as if she could see through all the layers of defense I had built over the years. Ethan didn't die in vain, Logan, but if you don't help us, others will die. Jake almost died. How many more before you do something? The question hung in the air, heavy, inescapable. I thought of Leo, my smart 13-year-old boy who loved hydrodynamics and sailboats, who called me dad even knowing I wasn't his biological father. I thought about keeping him safe, protected, away from danger. But I also thought of Ethan, of all the times he told me that doing the right thing wasn't always the easy thing. I'll consult, I said finally. I'll train your officers, but I'm not going into the field. I won't put myself at direct risk. That's non-negotiable. The sheriff nodded. Agreed. Sophia Cruz extended her hand. Thank you, Logan. You're doing the right thing. I shook her hand, but felt no relief. I only felt the weight of the past settling on my shoulders again, ready to crush me. In the following days, news of my rescue of Jake Hollis spread through Silverwood like wildfire. Suddenly, the ghost of the doc was the town hero, at least temporarily. People greeted me on the street, Sam Miller stopped looking at me with disdain, and even the bakery owner gave me a discount on bread. But I knew it was superficial, a thin layer of acceptance that could crack at any moment. And it cracked. Leo came home from school with a bleeding lip and a torn backpack. He was shaking, eyes red from crying. My heart plummeted. What happened? I asked, kneeling in front of him, holding his shoulders carefully. They called me a faggot son, he said, voice breaking. They said you're gay, that you and my dad were what, Leo? I asked softly, even knowing exactly what he was going to say. We're boyfriends. Is it true, Dad? Were you and Dad boyfriends? I felt the world stop. For 8 years, I protected Leo from this truth. Not out of shame, but fear. Fear he would be judged, rejected, hurt by something he had no control over. But now, looking into his eyes full of confusion and pain, I realized hiding the truth had only made everything worse. Yes, I said, voice steady. I loved your father, Leo. He was my best friend, my partner, and the love of my life. We hid because military rules didn't allow it. But yes, we loved each other. Leo looked at me for a long moment, processing. Then, suddenly, he hugged me tight, burying his face in my chest. I always knew you loved me. Now, I know you love my dad, too. That's enough for me. I held my son, squeezed tight, and let the tears fall for the first time in years. The next week, I started the training. The police station had a small training center next to the harbor, with an old concrete pool they used for basic rescue exercises. It was nothing compared to the military facilities where I trained for years, but it would do. I arrived early the first morning, carrying a bag with basic equipment, ropes, rescue buoys, improvised first aid kits. 6 officers were waiting for me by the pool, including Sheriff Tate and, to my surprise, Jake Hollis. Jake was standing, still visibly recovering, but present. He had lost weight, face paler than before, but his eyes held that determination I saw that night on the burning boat. When our gazes met, he nodded, a simple gesture of acknowledgement, maybe gratitude. I felt something strange in my chest, not discomfort, but a connection I didn't expect. Good morning, I said, keeping my voice firm, professional. I'm going to teach water rescue techniques, vessel boarding under fire, and combat first aid. If you follow my instructions and don't try to be heroes, no one will drown. Understood?" The officers nodded. I spent the next 3 hours demonstrating basic techniques: how to approach an unconscious victim in the water without being pulled down, how to stabilize someone with suspected spinal injury, how to improvise tourniquets using belts and ropes. Jake participated in everything, even with movements still limited by recent scars. He didn't complain, didn't apologize for slowness. He just did the work, pushed his own limits, and I respected that. At the end of the session, while the other officers dispersed, Jake stayed behind, drying his face with a towel. He approached slowly, hesitant. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked. "Sure." We walked to the side of the building, away from prying eyes. Jake leaned against the wall, took a deep breath, as if gathering courage to say something important. "I wanted to thank you," he began, "not just for saving me that night, but for being here. I know this isn't easy for you. Sophia told me about Ethan, about what happened." I felt my body stiffen. I didn't like talking about Ethan, especially with strangers. But Jake didn't seem to be judging. There was something different in his eyes, understanding, maybe even shared pain. "Ethan was my partner," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "He died trying to do the right thing. I don't want anyone else to die because of these criminals." Jake nodded but didn't look away. "I have a brother, Michael. He came out when he was 18. My father kicked him out of the house. I didn't do anything to stop it. I stood there, watching my brother get thrown onto the street because I was too cowardly to stand up to my father." He paused, voice breaking slightly. "Michael hasn't spoken to me in 10 years. I don't even know where he is, and I carry that every day." I stayed silent, processing. Jake was showing me his own wound, his own shame, and somehow that created a bridge between us, two men carrying regrets they couldn't undo. "You can still look for him," I said softly. "Maybe it's not too late." "Maybe," Jake murmured, looking at the ground. Then he raised his eyes again, and there was something there, a raw vulnerability, an openness I hadn't seen before. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Did you manage to forgive yourself for hiding what you felt for Ethan?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. No one had ever asked me that. No one had ever come so close to the central truth of my pain. "No," I admitted, voice coming out raspy. "I never did." Jake took a step forward, closing the distance between us. We were inches apart now, close enough for me to feel his body heat, the smell of chlorine and sweat mixed with something else, soap maybe, or just the natural scent of his skin. My heart raced. "I don't know if this helps," Jake said, voice low, almost a whisper. "But you saved me, twice, and I won't forget that." He extended his hand, and I held it, a firm grip that lasted longer than it should have. When our fingers finally let go, I felt a strange emptiness, as if something had been taken from me. In the following days, the training continued. But something had changed between me and Jake. Conversations extended beyond necessary. He started showing up at the shop after sessions, bringing coffee, helping with small repairs, talking about trivial things, the weather, the local football team, books we were reading. It was strange having someone around, someone who didn't judge me, who didn't see me as the ghost of the dock, but just as Logan. One night, almost 3 weeks after training started, Jake showed up at the shop later than usual. It was past 9, and I was putting tools away when I heard the knock on the door. I opened it to find him standing there, 2 beers in hand and a hesitant expression on his face. "Thought you might want some company," he said. I should have refused, should have kept the distance, protected the boundaries I built so carefully over the years. But I didn't. Instead, I stepped aside and let him in. We sat on the small back porch of the shop, facing the dark sea. The sound of waves was constant, comforting. We drank in silence for a few minutes, just appreciating the quiet. Then Jake spoke. "I found Michael," he said suddenly. He's living in Charleston, working as a nurse. I called him yesterday. I turned to face him. And? He answered, was surprised, didn't know what to say. Jake paused, took a long sip of beer. I apologized, said I was a coward, that I should have defended him, that I'm so sorry for everything. He didn't say he forgave me, but he didn't hang up either. It's a start, I said. It is. Jake looked at me, and there was something different in his eyes now. Hope, maybe, mixed with an intensity that made my stomach tighten. You inspired me, Logan. Seeing you, raising Leo, facing this prejudiced town, doing the right thing even when it's hard, it made me realize I was wasting my life living in fear. I didn't know what to say. No one had ever called me inspiring before. I always saw myself as someone just surviving, dragging through the days until everything made some sense. But maybe Jake saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. You're braver than you think, I said finally. Jake smiled, a small, sad, but genuine smile. Then he did something that took me completely by surprise. He reached out and touched my hand, fingers interlacing softly, almost shyly. The touch was electric, charged with something neither of us dared name yet. Logan, he said, voice low, vulnerable. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. Do you think it's possible to start over, even after everything? I looked at our intertwined hands, felt the warmth of his skin against mine, and realized that for the first time in 8 years, I wanted to try. I wanted to let someone in again. I wanted to stop living like a ghost. I don't know, I admitted, but maybe we can find out together. Jake leaned in slowly, giving me enough time to pull back if I wanted, but I didn't pull back. Instead, I leaned forward, closing the distance between us. Our lips touched, hesitant at first, almost shy, as if testing unknown ground. But then something broke. Hesitation gave way to urgency, and the kiss deepened. My hands found Jake's shoulders, pulling him closer. His hand slid through my hair, anchoring himself to me, as if he were drowning and I was his only lifeline. He tasted like beer and salt and something else, something I didn't know I was missing until that moment. We moved inside the shop, stumbling over tools, laughing softly between urgent kisses. We reached the small office in the back, where I kept an old sofa for nights I worked too late. Jake pushed me gently onto the sofa, and I pulled him down with me, our bodies fitting together surprisingly naturally. I explored his body with my hands, the muscles of his shoulders, the curve of his waist, the recent scars on his abdomen I had helped heal. I traced every mark with my fingers, then my lips, an act of care reflecting my rescue skills. Save, protect, heal. Jake responded with equal attention, exploring my body with a reverence that spoke of deep respect and admiration. The intimacy between us intensified, not just physical, but emotional. It was as if every touch, every synchronized breath, every name murmured low was a promise. A promise that we weren't alone anymore, that it was possible to trust again, that maybe, just maybe, we could build something real. When we finally stopped, exhausted and intertwined on the narrow sofa, Jake laid his head on my chest, listening to the erratic rhythm of my heart return to normal. I ran my fingers through his hair, feeling the soft texture, the warmth of his skin. I saved your life twice, I murmured in the dark. Maybe you're saving mine now. Jake lifted his head, looked at me with those eyes that were no longer a stranger's, and smiled. Then we're even. We laughed together, a low, intimate sound that filled the silence of the night. And for the first time in 8 years, I felt something beyond pain and grief. I felt hope. But hope has a price, always does. And the next day, returning home, I found my shop vandalized. Hateful words written in red paint on the walls. Faggot, get out of town, protect your children. The front window glass was shattered, shards scattered on the floor. Leo was outside, looking at the destruction with tears in his eyes. When he saw me, he ran and hugged me tight. "They're hating us again," he said, voice breaking. I held my son, squeezed tight, and felt anger rise in my chest. Not just for the graffiti, but for everything. For the town that never accepted us, for the prejudice that never disappeared, for the constant fear that Leo would suffer because of who I was. But then I remembered Jake's words. "You're braver than you think." And I realized courage wasn't having no fear. Courage was continuing, even with fear. Continuing to live, continuing to love, continuing to fight. "They can hate us," I said to Leo, voice firm, "but we won't let that define us. We're gonna clean this up, we're gonna fix the window, and we're gonna keep living our life. Because that's what we do, Leo. We don't give up." Leo looked at me, wiped his tears, and nodded. "Okay, Dad, let's keep going." And that's exactly what we did. 3 weeks after the graffiti, Sophia Cruz called us for an emergency meeting. The task force had finally identified the Trident's main hideout, an abandoned warehouse at the Old Harbor, exactly where Ethan had been ambushed 8 years ago. The coincidence was disturbing, almost as if the universe were forcing me to confront that place, that pain, that moment my life split in half. "We're raiding tomorrow at dawn," Sophia announced, pointing to the tactical map spread on the table. "Marcos Valera, the ringleader, will be there overseeing a large shipment. It's our best chance to catch them all at once." I looked at the map, identifying the aquatic escape routes, the same drainage tunnels Ethan tried to block before being killed. My stomach tightened. "Watch the tunnels," I said, voice coming out tense. "They lead directly to the sea. It's a perfect trap. Ethan found that out the hard way." Sheriff Tate nodded, marking the points on the map. "We'll block the water exits before entering. You'll stay at command central, monitoring via drone and radio." "Understood." Jake, who was across the table, looked at me with concern. Since that night at the shop, our relationship had changed completely. We weren't just acquaintances or allies anymore. We were something deeper, more intimate, though we hadn't put a name to it yet. He knew how much that place meant to me, how much that operation reopened old wounds. After the meeting, Jay caught up with me in the parking lot. "Are you okay?" he asked, voice low, worried. "No," I admitted, "but I will be." He held my hand, interlacing fingers, a simple gesture carrying more comfort than any words. "We're going to get these guys, Logan, for Ethan, for everyone they hurt." I know. I squeezed his hand back, trying to absorb the strength he offered. "Just promise you'll be careful in there. I don't want to have to save you a third time." Jake smiled, but there was seriousness in his eyes. "I promise." That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed awake, lying on the living room couch, staring at the ceiling, thinking of Ethan. I remembered the last conversation we had before his death. He was excited, believing he finally had concrete evidence against the Trident, that he could finally bring justice to all the families destroyed by smuggling. "This is going to change everything, Logan," he had said, eyes shining. "We're going to make a difference." But he died before he could. Died alone, drowned, shot, while I was miles away. And for 8 years, I carried the guilt of not being there, of not saving him like I saved so many others. Leo appeared in the living room doorway, interrupting my thoughts. He was in pajamas, hair messy, eyes sleepy. "Can't sleep, Dad?" he asked. "No, come here." Leo sat next to me on the couch, resting his head on my shoulder. We spent a few minutes in silence, just appreciating each other's company. "Will you be okay tomorrow?" Leo asked finally. "I will," I said, trying to sound convincing. "I'll stay away from danger, just coordinating everything from a safe distance." Leo looked at me, and there was something in his eyes, maturity beyond his 13 years, understanding that came from losing a father and almost losing another. "I know you have to do this. For Dad, just come back home, okay?" "I promise," I said, hugging my son. "I always come back." Dawn arrived too fast. At 5 a.m., I was at Command Central, set up in a trailer next to the harbor, surrounded by monitors showing drone feeds and surveillance cameras. Sophia, Sheriff Tate, and a team of federal officers coordinated the operation. Jake led the tactical team in the field, wearing a bulletproof vest and comms gear. Alpha team in position, Jake's voice crackled on the radio. Bravo team in position, another voice confirmed. Drainage tunnels blocked, a third officer reported. Sophia looked at me. We're ready. Any final observations? I scanned the monitors, looking for any detail that might indicate a trap. The warehouse seemed quiet, only 2 guards visible at the entrance. But something bothered me. It was too quiet, too organized. Stay alert, I said. Varela is experienced. If he feels something is wrong, he'll try to flee through the tunnels. Doesn't matter if they're blocked, he'll try. Understood, Sophia confirmed. Then, on the radio, all teams, authorized to enter. Repeat, authorized to enter. I watched on the monitors as tactical teams moved quickly toward the warehouse. They entered simultaneously from 3 different points, shouting commands, covering each other with military precision. Initially, everything went according to plan. Guards were neutralized quickly, no shots fired. The team advanced inside the warehouse. And then, everything fell apart. Contact! Contact! Jake's voice exploded on the radio, followed by the deafening sound of gunfire. They were waiting! It's an ambush! My heart raced. On the drone cameras, I saw figures emerging from hidden containers inside the warehouse, firing at the tactical team. Total chaos! Officers running for cover, returning fire, shouts on the radio. Alpha team, fall back to defensive position, Sophia ordered, voice tense but controlled. Negative, Jake replied. Varela is fleeing, heading for the tunnels. I switched the drone camera, focusing on the rear of the warehouse, and there he was, Marcos Varela, a tall, thin man, running toward the drainage tunnel entrance with 3 henchmen. My blood ran cold. It was exactly as Ethan had described years ago, exactly the pattern that led to his death. Jake, don't follow him alone, I shouted into the radio. It's the same pattern. They'll ambush you in the tunnels. I can't let him escape, Jake replied, already running after Varela. Jake, no! But he had already entered the tunnels. On the monitors, I lost visual signal. I only had radio audio. Heavy breathing, footsteps echoing, water dripping. And then, gunshots. Many gunshots. Officer down! Officer down! Someone shouted on the radio. My world stopped. Not again. Not Jake. Not after everything. I didn't think, just acted. Got up from the chair, ran out of the trailer, ignored Sophia's shouts calling me back. Ran toward the warehouse, heart hammering in my chest, lungs burning. Reached the tunnel entrance in less than 2 minutes, grabbed a flashlight from an injured officer at the exit, and dove into the darkness. The tunnel was narrow, slippery, with dirty water up to ankles. I followed the sounds, gasping breath, groans of pain. Turned a corner and found Jake lying on the soaked ground, bleeding from the chest, hand pressing the wound. His eyes widened when he saw me. Logan shouldn't be here, he whispered, every word a struggle. Shut up, I said, kneeling beside him, assessing the wound. Bullet entry in left chest, just below the collarbone. Active bleeding, but didn't hit a main artery. Still had time. You're not dying here, understood? I won't allow it. I tore his shirt, exposed the wound, and applied direct pressure using my own hands. Warm blood flowed between my fingers, but I kept firm pressure, controlling the flow. Jake moaned in pain, body twisting. Breathe slowly, I instructed, voice coming out calmer than I felt. Breathe with me. In, out. In, out. Jake obeyed, synchronizing his breathing with mine. I took a first aid kit from his vest, removed the chest seal, and applied it over the wound, sealing it completely. Jake's breathing improved immediately. Now let's get out of here, I said, starting to lift him. But then I heard footsteps behind us. I turned and saw Marcos Varela emerging from the darkness, a gun pointed directly at my head. He was alone now, his henchmen probably neutralized by the tactical team, but he was still armed, still dangerous. "You must be Logan Vance," Varela said, voice calm, almost friendly. "Heard about you. The hero who saves everyone, the man who never gives up." "Put the gun down," I said, keeping my voice steady even with the barrel pointed at me. "Do you know who I am?" he asked, ignoring my command. "I know. You're the man who killed Ethan Shaw." Varela smiled, a cold, empty smile. "Ah, yes, the officer who got too curious. He was brave, I'll admit, but stupid, just like you." Anger rose in my chest, hot and violent, but I controlled it. Anger wouldn't save Jake. Anger wouldn't bring justice for Ethan. Only calm, precise action would do that. "You're not getting out of here," I said. "The tunnel is blocked, no exit." "There's always an exit," Varela replied, starting to back away slowly, still keeping the gun pointed. "Always." But he didn't count on Sophia Cruz and the tactical team blocking the exit behind him. Flashlight beams flooded the tunnel, voices shouting commands. Varela turned, tried to shoot, but was taken down before he could. 3 officers subdued him, handcuffed him, and dragged him out. Sophia appeared beside me, breathless. "Is Jake alive?" "He is, but needs immediate surgery." The medical team arrived seconds later, taking control. They put Jake on a stretcher, stabilized the wound, and took him out of the tunnels. I stayed there, kneeling in the dirty water, covered in blood, shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. Sophia extended a hand, helping me up. "You saved his life, again." "I know. And you also captured Varela. Case closed." I nodded, but felt no victory. Just felt tired. At the hospital, I stayed in the waiting room during Jake's 4-hour surgery. Leo arrived with Sam Miller, who had offered to pick him up from school. My son hugged me tight, saying nothing, just holding me. Sam stood there too, silent, supportive. When the surgeon finally came out, he was smiling. "He'll be fine. The bullet didn't hit any vital organs. He'll need weeks of recovery, but he'll survive." I felt my whole body relax, the weight I was carrying finally being released. "Can I see him?" "In a few minutes. He's waking up from anesthesia." When I was allowed into the room, Jake was lying in bed, pale but conscious. He smiled when he saw me, that weak but genuine smile I already knew so well. "You can't stop saving me, can you?" he murmured. I sat in the chair beside the bed, held his hand. "Not when it comes to you." "Thank you, Logan, for everything." "No need to thank me. Just focus on recovering." Jake squeezed my hand. "I love you, you know." The words hit me like lightning. No one had said that to me since Ethan. No one had gotten close enough to feel that. And suddenly, there in that hospital room, I realized I felt the same. "I love you too," I said, voice breaking slightly. 6 months later, my life had changed completely. Documents seized in Varela's warehouse contained concrete evidence linking him to Ethan's death. The case was reopened, tried, and Varela was sentenced to life in prison. Finally, after 8 years, I had closure. But more important than legal justice was personal justice. I visited Ethan's grave for the first time since the funeral. I knelt on the grass, placed fresh flowers, and left a letter. "Ethan," I wrote, "I finally did it. The men who killed you are in prison. Leo is growing up strong and smart, exactly as you expected. And I found someone who makes me want to live again, not just survive. I know you'd be happy for me. Thank you for Leo. Thank you for teaching me that loving truthfully is the only way to live. I'll never forget you, but I won't live tied to the past anymore either. It's time to move on. With love, Logan." The next day, I inaugurated Vance Marine Safety and Response, a community training center where I taught combat first aid, water rescue techniques, and maritime safety to civilians, LGBTQ+ youth, and local professionals. Michael, Jake's brother, who had reconciled with the family thanks to our encouragement, became an instructor and mentor at the center. Sam Miller also volunteered, bringing his Coast Guard experience. The Silverwood community changed gradually. Gossip decreased, graffiti stopped. People started greeting me by name, no longer looking at me as the ghost of the dock, but as someone who was part of the town, someone who contributed, someone who deserved respect. Jake and I publicly acknowledged our relationship. We appeared together at community events, dinners at Sam's house, Leo's soccer games. He moved into my house 6 months after the surgery, and we built a life together, not hidden, not ashamed, but lived in full truth. One evening, almost a year after the raid, the three of us, me, Jake, and Leo, were on the boat I had refurbished, sailing at sunset off the coast of Silverwood. Leo was at the helm, smiling, proud to control the vessel alone. Jake was beside me, fingers interlaced with mine, eyes fixed on the horizon. I looked at that scene, my happy son, the man I loved beside me, the calm sea before us, and realized I had finally found peace. Not the peace that comes from forgetting the past, but the peace that comes from honoring it while building a future. "What are you thinking about?" Jake asked softly. "About how I got here," I replied. "I spent years believing my greatest courage was diving into icy waters to save strangers. But the truth is, the bravest actions aren't the grand gestures that change the world. They're the quiet decisions to help a person breathe one more day, to allow someone to see who you really are, to choose to live in your truth even when the world around judges you." Jake smiled, squeezed my hand. "You're the bravest man I know, Logan Vance." "I learned from the best," I said, thinking of Ethan, of Leo, of everyone who taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, but action despite fear. The sun set completely, dyeing the sky orange and purple. Leo turned off the engine, and we floated there gently on the calm waters. It was a perfect moment, silent, intimate, complete. "Dad," Leo said suddenly, turning to look at me, "thank you for everything, for never giving up on me, for being brave, for teaching me that loving isn't wrong, even when others say it is." I felt tears burn my eyes, but I didn't hold them back. Let them flow freely, without shame. "Thank you, Leo, for giving me a reason to continue, even on the hardest days." Jake pulled us into a group hug, the three of us together, a non-traditional family, but real, more real than anything I had ever experienced. Sometimes the greatest courage is simply to stay. Stay in your truth. Stay beside who you love. Stay when it would be easier to run. And I finally learned to stay. I looked at the horizon one last time, thinking of Ethan, and whispered a silent thank you. "Thank you for Leo. Thank you for teaching me to love. Thank you for giving me strength to move on." And then, with Jake beside me and Leo in front of us, I turned the engine on again and we sailed back home. Not to a physical house, but to the place where I finally felt whole, beside the people I loved, living with truth, without fear, without shame, just living.